Wonderful. Thank you, Angie. It's so great to be here. For the next 30 minutes or so, we really want to challenge you to think about how you can innovate. So, as Angie said, the request is out there. What are the best things to do to grow your business in these uncertain times? So, how can you make a change or do something in a new way that helps your business solve a problem for your ideal client? So at Bruck Marketing, we believe that driving prospects to your website before you get the messaging right isn't just a waste of time, but it burns valuable leads that are unlikely to return. So we have a process called our persuasion framework, and that blends decision science, storytelling, and design to help engage leads and close new customers. So for today, with this 5-step process, we really want to focus on 2 steps: engaging and courting. So here's how we're going to break things down. We're going to spend some time talking about creating clear and engaging messages to showcase how you're innovating. And then we want to talk about identifying your ideal client. And then we're going to get to developing a pipeline, a lead pipeline, so you can share those clear and compelling messages. Not going to spend a lot of time here. Angie, thank you for the great introduction. I am Laura Bruck, and Brian and I started Bruck Marketing really because we saw a need for clear messaging and fundamental marketing practices to communicate strong stories to help generate leads. My background, as Angie said, is B2B marketing, specifically content marketing and pipeline development. And so I'm really just going to turn it over to Brian, who's going to introduce himself a little further and then kick off our discussion with a brief overview of our persuasion framework.
Cool. So Laura and I have been doing this together for not quite 2 years now. And before that, I spent about a dozen years working with a small team that supported a couple of the largest global marketing agencies in the world. And what we were doing for them was helping them communicate the value that they were providing to their clients. And their clients were people like, Coca-Cola and Samsung and GE and GM, et cetera. And my role in that, in helping them provide that communication, was to communicate internally between marketers and executives and technologists and designers. And so I really became passionate about communicating to different audiences and making sure that everything was clear to the specific audience that I was talking to. And I've certainly brought that to my role here at Bruck Marketing. And I'm having a lot of fun working on this for really a lot of small and medium-sized businesses now, and doing something that frankly feels more important to me, which is helping small and medium-sized businesses get the word out about the problems that they're solving for their customers. Let's jump into the framework, Laura. Laura's got the buttons, so I'm gonna prompt her every once in a while. So we have this 5-step framework for really brand and marketing as a whole. And step 1 is to engage your audience. That's what I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about this morning. You imagine that if a prospect comes to your website, they might read the thing front to back, top to bottom, go find a competitor's website, read that front and back, make a pros and cons list, and come to some kind of educated decision. The reality is that somebody arrives at your website, and it's proven they actually start to form an opinion in less than a second on your website. And depending on the opinion that they form, they either spend their time on your website looking for gotchas and coming to it with a skeptical point of view, or they form a really positive opinion right away, and they start reading with wild abandon and want to believe in what you have to offer. So it's really important that we get the right message in front of them right away, and that we keep them engaged to read to the end of your message. We also know that if somebody spends 10 seconds on your website, they're continuing to read a little bit skeptically, right? And they're likely to drop. But if you can get them to stick around on your website for 30 seconds, they're more likely to stick around for another 2 minutes and continue to read your website and get your whole message. And once they're reading for 2 minutes, it's a good chance that you're gonna have a conversion. So developing the right story to keep them around on your website for greater than 30 seconds is critical to your success. And we're going to show you today one way of tackling that challenge. So engage is the first step. Guide is the second step. We're really passionate about decision science. And there are a lot of great decision science techniques that we can use to rig your message to achieve specific business objectives that you have. Maybe it's that you want to, reduce your sales cycle, or you have multiple product lines and there's one of them that you really want to be selling more of, right? There are all sorts of things that we can use existing research to inform how we should message that information and maximize our conversions. Third step, captivate. This is the third step for you, but it's actually the first step that your customer engages with, and that's the design of your website and your materials, right? What is it that you're doing to catch their attention right away and make sure that they know that they're in the right place, that this is for them, and that you are offering something that is modern and going to be successful for them. Step 4. This is where Laura is going to take over today, is the courting process. Once you have all of those things in place, now you can start your lead generation process, right? You're not going to put the wrong message or the wrong imagery out in front of customers. You want to put the right stuff so that once you've reached out to them over and over again, potentially, they're more likely to think of you first, your brand first, when they are ready to buy. And then finally, close. Once somebody is indicating that that they're in a buying mood, that they may actually make a purchase, the people and systems and whatnot that you put in front of them at that point become very critical. Now this is a very high value lead, and we want to make sure that we put the right stuff in front of them next and make them a high priority. So that's our framework. Again, we're going to spend a little bit of time now on the engage step. Typically, the way that we handle messaging for clients is we set up an upfront workshop. And rather than handling discovery over the course of 5 calls over the course of a month and a half, we get an awful lot of information in about 2.5 hours with a client. And rather than start off with a list of what services do you offer, or what features do you have in your product, we start with this slide right here. And we get them brainstorming about who their ideal client or their ideal customer really is. Are they a B2B or are they a B2C? A lot of times we're finding that they're both, right? And that there's each kind of audience for them. And then for each of these categories that you see in circles, the industry, the company size, the buyer, the regions, we ask them to think about this in 3 different ways, right? So if I say, what region can you sell to? And if you're selling out of your home office, the answer is probably, I can sell this anywhere, right? It doesn't matter what region. But as we dig in deeper and try to understand what regions are most likely to buy your product, we typically get a different answer. So that's what confidence is. Confidence is about which regions, which buyers, which industries are most likely to buy or pay the most. Criticality is a little bit different, right? So especially if we're thinking about the buyer, a lot of times the answer is that the CEO of companies needs what I'm selling more than anybody else, but they're not going to be responsive if I try to sell it to them. It's most critical to them, but I have greater confidence if I said sell this to the head of operations, for instance. And it's really important to think these things through before you start building your message, right? Who are you going to message to that? Are you going to you're going to message to the head of operations, or are you going to message to the CEO? So we step through and we think about the industry, the company size, and that might be headcount, that might be revenue. Probably you want to think about both. When we think about the buyer, and again, when I'm saying buyer, I'm talking about what is the role within an organization that's going to buy this, or if this is a B2C sale, to customers, not to businesses, what is the type of customer that is most likely to buy this? And then regions. For Laura and I, we could sell what we're doing anywhere in the country, really anywhere in the world. We don't want to sell anywhere in the world because that would be more work, frankly, and we can sell in the country. And we're more likely to sell to people that are in the same region as us. Not for any practical reason, but because when somebody sees, oh, Maryland, I live in Maryland, right? Immediately there's some serendipity and a reason that they should stick around and keep reading. That's the only reason we're more likely to sell in Maryland. And the same is probably the case for a lot of you. All right, so let's move on to the next slide. So we haven't done any writing yet, right? We do all of this just to get in the mind frame of the ideal customer before we do any writing. A
Can I
couple more
just
things that
interject? One thing I
sure.
want to point out too, we do have a workbook that
Yeah.
walks through these steps and really allows you to kind of write in your answers to these questions, and that will be provided out to everyone after the webinar.
Yeah. Yeah, good point.
If you're writing
Yeah,
English.
yeah, and it'll remind you all of these different categories, regions and buyers and whatnots that you should be thinking about, and criticality and confidence. That's all in there. Reminders of that. So last two things that we like to think about the ideal customer before we start writing are the behaviors and traits of these customers. How do they spend their time? Very often when we ask this question, immediately the answers start to identify the problem that the customer has, right? They're spending all of their time in reactionary mode on phone calls rather than doing the proactive work that they want to be spending their time on. How can our product help them solve that, right? As an example. And then what do you want from them, right? What is it that makes somebody an ideal customer for you personally that's going to make you more excited to work with them? The last thing that we're showing on my left-hand, the left-hand side of the screen is a little snippet from LinkedIn Sales Navigator. And this is just a little teaser. Laura's going to show you more of this later. But one thing that this process also helps inform is targeting of your ideal customer when it is time to reach out and message them, which is something that we can do through LinkedIn Sales Navigator. And then we have a series of tools that'll help you, continue the conversation with them. Let's jump to the next slide. Story structure. So this is something that we've put a lot of thought into and really considered from a lot of angles. There are 4 story templates that we use quite regularly. Off the top of my head, this is Brand Script, which is something developed by Donald Miller, really interesting book on this. I think it's Building Your Brand Story is the name of the book. If you're interested in reading up on that, it's a great one. Another example of a story template is a fear appeal. This one was developed by decision scientists. Another one is an aspiration appeal, and another one is a story spine, and that was developed by storytellers. It's what Pixar uses when they write a movie. And all of them are designed to do 2 things really. One is to keep the reader focused in, create a story gap for them that they want to fill. In other words, create suspense, right? So that they feel like, I need to read to the end of this and understand how this problem is going to get solved. And then the other one is really to make sure that you're putting words in the right order so that they're most effective, but also to make your story easier to write. If you sit down and you have a blank page and you think, I have all these features that I want to talk about, and you aren't writing from a structure, it's really hard to do. I mean, I'm sure all of you have sat down and tried to do this. It's really challenging to come up with, what am I going to say next? Using a story structure, using a story template makes this much faster, easier to do, but it also makes it way, way more effective and less rambly sounding than if you sit down with no plan. So this is the template that we're going to talk about today and that your workbook is going to walk you through as well. It opens with talking about a customer and empathy. So here's an example. Every day you return to your city apartment and circle the grid searching for available parking. It's an exhausting end to a hard day and an awful waste of time. Now notice that what we're doing here is we're talking about the customer. We're not talking about your brand. We're not talking about your product yet. We're just talking about your customer and creating some empathy with them, showing them that we understand their problem. Pull up the next one, Lara. Now we're going to pivot, right? And so what I mean by that is we're going to make the transition from talking about your customer and their problem to talking about your plan to solve their problem. And we're going to do that here by zooming out and talking about people as a whole, right? So that's why in 2019, over 1 million city commuters turned to technology to improve their parking experience. What I want to again point out here is we're still not talking about your brand. We're not talking about your problem yet, or your product or your solution yet. They're not ready to hear that yet, right? Way more effective if you tell them there's a solution to your problem, and then we can start talking about your solution. So let's go there now, Laura. So what is your plan? The StarkMark mobile app notices when you arrive in your parking radius, alerts you to nearby parking spots as they open up, and directs you to the available spot with voice guidance. So now they understand what our product is and how it solves a problem that they have. This is so critical because if you jump right to, I have a mobile app that does this, they're still trying to wrap their heads around why am I even reading this? But when you start with the problem at the beginning, they understand a problem right away. And by the time you get to the plan, they can wrap their heads around it. They're already there with you. So let's go to the next step. Now we can start to demonstrate your authority. And what we're doing here is mostly leaning on a decision science principle called social proof. Almost all the time, what we're doing with your authority statement is we're saying other people have decided that we're a good company to work with. Therefore, it is safe to work with us. So in this case, we're saying over 5 years, we've perfected the art of rapidly locating parking spots for our 10,000 plus happy subscribers, right? And for you, this might be how many years you've been in business. It might be how many customers you have. It might be some success metric about ROI. There are a number of ways that you can handle this, and the workbook lists out a bunch more. And then finally, we're going to call the customer to action and present some kind of resolution for them. So what do you want them to do, right? You've told them all about the problem that they have, what your solution is, but what do you want them to do now? Most of the time, you want them to probably click a button or make a phone call or join today and have a button that's right nearby that says join today on it also. And stop wasting valuable time is how you're resolving their problem at the end of the story. So that's a short story that solves the problem of finding a parking space in a crowded city. And now let's step through a little bit more in detail here about why we're doing what. So the first thing, again, as business owners, as domain experts, we suffer for what's called curse of knowledge bias. This is another decision science principle. It's been studied and researched to death. We know for sure that all of us suffer from this. And what it is that as experts, it's really hard for us to separate what we know because we're experts from what we know because it's common sense, right? We don't understand very clearly what it is that our customers would also understand about our products. And we're really excited about our solutions, right? We want to talk about them. We want to lead with that, but we shouldn't do it. What we should do is open with empathy, bring the story to the customer's world first, and then lead them into our world, which is our solution, our product. There are 5 kinds of stories that a customer can relate to. And again, as you're deciding what to write about, this is a brainstorm process, right? You're not going to write 5 different stories necessarily, but you want to think about each of these possibilities for writing a story that your customer can relate to. So it's either going to be a story about an obstacle where your customer wants something, but there's a barrier in the way. They want to go home and relax at the end of a long day, but they can't find a parking spot when they get there. That's the obstacle. How are they going to resolve that, right? So we've already created a sense of tension and a sense of something that the reader wants to resolve by reading to the end of the story. Vulnerability is another example where your customer safety or stability is at risk if they don't take a protective action. Another example of a story they can relate to is disruption, where once upon a time in the good old days, something was better for your customer than it is now. And you'll see this all the time now in marketing and in politics because it's fantastically effective. Whether there really was a good old days or not, when you talk about something as though it existed in the good old days and you want to get back to that, it's incredibly effective for an audience. An aspiration. Now we're into a different category of thing here now, where it's you talk about it a little bit differently, but it's still aspiration is a problem. I have an aspiration for the kind of person that I want to be. How can you help me solve the problem of I am not my aspirational self yet, right? So what kind of person does your customer want to be, and how does your product get them? And then finally, an experience. How do your customers want to spend their time? What experiences do they want to avoid? How can you help them solve that? So those are the 5 kind of stories that you might want to consider writing about. And when you sit down to write, again, try all 5 of these. See what resonates best. Even if you start to write your obstacle and you think, hey, this obstacle sounds right, write all 5 things. See what resonates once you're done. On to the next slide, Lar. All right, so now we have this pandemic going on. And one thing that you consider as you're thinking through what problem you're going to solve for your customer is what are the new problem areas that people are super focused on right now through a pandemic that your product or your service might help them solve. Even if it's not the fundamental or primary thing that your product was designed to do or your service was designed to do, it may be that you solve one of these problems and it hasn't even occurred to you yet to talk about it. So what we're asking you to do is just consider these areas. So so cash flow. Everybody is laser focused on cash flow right now, because if you run out of money, then what do you do? What is your business going to do? So if you have a product that helps people, access cash flow now and not just later, that's something important to talk about and build a story around. Isolation, technical deficiency, supply chain events, right? Dealing with, I had live events that my business is dependent on. What am I going to do about that this year? Remote employee management, change management, brand relevance, communication, trust, right? How do I trust my employees when they're distributed across the country and I can't see them in person anymore? Access, security, safety, and health, right? So these are all areas that are really important to let people know if you can solve a problem in these areas right now. Let's move on to the next slide and give you an example. So let's say I have an incredible webinar about cookies, right? I bake cookies for a living, and I want to share the joy of cooking cookies to the world. But now we have this pandemic going on, right? So how can I frame this in a way that it's relevant in a pandemic? And here are a few ways that lean on the types of stories that people can relate to. So as an obstacle, you would do anything right now for a cookie with a crispy caramel outer layer that gives way to warm, gooey heaven on your tongue, but your local bakery is closed. Stupid pandemic. That's an obstacle, right? You want the cookie, but there's something in the way. The pandemic's in the way. Vulnerability. You adore your local bakery, but it's a tight space with high customer traffic. Right now, you can't justify putting your family's health at risk by going out for cookies, right? So you see the difference here. It's a difference of tone. It's a difference of what the problem is for your customer. They want the cookie, but it's not safe for them to go get the cookie. What are they going to do about it? In both cases, we've opened up a story gap. We have a problem, but we don't have a solution yet. So we want to keep reading. One third option here is an aspiration. Right now, more than ever, your kitchen is the center of your family's world, and you are the master of transforming ingredients into smiles and memories. Same thing, right? It reads like a problem in a way, in that I don't know how it is that I'm going to transform ingredients into smiles and memories yet. I need some kind of solution to help me get there. So how do I bridge this? What is my plan? Well, there's a single plan that solves for all three of these problems, even though they're very distinct problems. So let's talk about the plan. That's step 2 in the core of your story, right? So click one more time. Yeah. So here's the plan that applies to all three. Our cookie baking webinar walks you through the steps to bake a perfect cookie and teaches you the science behind each ingredient so you can develop your own family recipe. You'll leave finally knowing the difference between baking powder and baking soda. I'll tell you later what the difference between baking powder and baking soda is if you want to know. So we have a plan now to solve all three problems, and we want our customers to do something about it. We want them to act. So we're going to give them an action to take, and we're going to remind them what's at stake for them, right? We want to resolve this story. So for the obstacle story, we tell them to sign up today so you can finally give your taste buds what they are begging you for, right? That's what we set up in an obstacle, is that you were craving something. Now we want to show them that we've resolved that. We want to remind them that we've resolved that. Next one. Vulnerability. Sign up today so you can keep your family both safe and happy, right? We're resolving the vulnerability story now. And finally, the aspiration story. Sign up today so your family won't feel stuck at home anymore. Home is where the cookies are. So again, the point I'm trying to make here is that you have a problem statement at the beginning. You have the empathy with your customer, and that needs to be tied in some way to the way that you resolve the story. Those two things need to be aligned. But your plan can be kind of an island unto itself. Your plan, as long as it solves the problem, can be applicable to all three kinds of story. Next, please. Oh, hey, Laura, you're up.
All right.
So one more thing, just real quick. I'll just remind you that we do have this workbook that's going to step you through everything that we just talked about, and some details that we didn't talk about, but also gets into 2 sections of the story that we didn't talk about at all, which is the pivot and the authority statement, and shows you how to set those things up and create the whole story. And there's also links to other resources in the document. So even though you might print that out, also keep the PDF so you can click the links and go to various websites that have additional information for you. All right, Laura, over to you.
Great. Thanks, Brian. So the idea of courting is that you want to stay in front of your target market and your clients now that you have the right messaging. It's focused on solving your ideal client's problem. So now you need to push it out there and get it in front of them. So how are you going to reach them? Do you have an email system, a blog on your website? The tools that you use to reach both prospects and existing clients are important, but it's the effective use of those tools that make all the difference. The number of clients that we work with where they have these amazing tools, but they're not connected. There's not an ecosystem in place, is pretty surprising. And it's the power of those tools all working together that can really create a strong pipeline process, if you will. So we want to talk about building a B2B sales funnel. And there's 3 common approaches that we'll talk about. So content marketing. So if you've been successfully developing content and converting prospects through that content, it's really just about keeping that content relevant. So we're in a pandemic. Are you changing the things that you're talking about? Are you making sure that you're staying relevant in what you're talking about? The thing about content marketing is that it is a long-term strategy, and it can be a part of any lead gen strategy, but as a standalone, it can be extremely effective. It just takes time, right? You're counting on SEO, you're counting on your content being the driver for getting people to your website. The next is list buying. So this is not our recommended path. It can be costly, and the percent response that you're going to get is very low. There are places where buying small groups of contacts or lists can be beneficial, but as a standalone process or standalone strategy, we definitely don't recommend it. And then there's LinkedIn engagement. So as a lead gen strategy, we've found LinkedIn to be very effective, particularly right now. So by leveraging LinkedIn Sales Navigator, you can really hone in on that target market. And you're doing it within the network that you can identify the degree of connection to you. So you can start a more casual conversation. It's an opportunity to network, share relevant expertise, and then if appropriate, you can move them to a more formal conversation about your services and how you can help them. And then all of them will ultimately connect to your email and automations. So you want to move from a personal conversation at some point, or from them reading your content. Ultimately, you want to get them into an email where you're nurturing them and you're putting consistent communications in front of them. So I want to talk a little bit about the LinkedIn lead generation and really just help you see the ecosystem that I've referred to here and how it works. So at a really high level, I'll walk you through the process. Then I'm going to give you examples of each of these steps. We already mentioned everything starts with targeting that ideal customer, and you can do that through LinkedIn Sales Navigator. Then you're going to request connections. So really, you can do that automatic. There's systems that sit on top of Sales Navigator that allow you to do that automatically, and it's keeping within the list you created in Sales Navigator. You can send those out as much as 40 per day, asking people to connect to you. I'm not sure how you all familiar we're all with Sales Navigator, but one of the things that you can select is the degree of connection, and I'll show you that in a minute. So if Angie and I are connected, then people that Angie is connected to that I'm not are within my second degree of connection. So I can reach out to them if I have something worthwhile to talk to them about, and they're going to say, oh, well, Laura's connected to Angie, so I'm going to go ahead and accept her connection, and now I can start a conversation. Now we're going to send LinkedIn emails, and I'll show you what this looks like. And then we're going to use shortcuts to continue the conversation. And finally, we're going to migrate those into an email. So let's look at what this all looks like. So this is within Sales Navigator. So like I mentioned, the second degree connections is a filter you can turn on. So you're not blindly asking people to connect with you, because that's kind of a no-no thing in LinkedIn. You can also specify, industries, size of the businesses, the regions, all those things that Brian was talking about that are like attributes of a business. So this is an example of the connection request, this top one here. So basically, I would reach out, I'm introducing myself, and I'm expanding my LinkedIn network, and I'm asking them if they'd like to connect. So then if they connect, and only if they connect, I can set up a series of messages that go to them. And it could be 2 hours later, it could be 2 days later, it could be 2 weeks later. But in these, I'm always offering content, right? Similar to content marketing, right? It's all about relevance and the value of information that you're providing to them. So in this conversation, I'm offering up a white paper that talks about those 4-story templates that Brian was referring to, right? The brand template. So if somebody's interested in getting this white paper, then they'll message back to me. And I can set up click and replies that I click a button, and it actually, in this case, this is my example. Somebody says that they're interested in learning more about the workshop. So I can send them a Calendly link, and they can schedule a meeting with me to learn more about our workshop. But I can also send them our Engage PDF. So someone just simply says, yeah, I'd like to read that. I can click them a link that sends them that PDF. So I'm not selling them anything. I'm literally just having a conversation, sharing what I know that's that I believe could be relevant to them. And if they're interested, they take that information. If they're not, they might say no thanks, and I can click a button that says, hey, glad to be connected. Thanks for reaching out, even if they just say they're not interested. And then finally, we want to transition it over to email, right? At the end of the day, not everybody's going to be in that right position to be interested in what you're talking about at that moment. But maybe 6 months from now, they would. So that's the value of monthly outreach. So I want to transition them from being just, one-on-one via LinkedIn. I want to introduce them now to not just Laura. I want to say, hey, I'm going to transition you over to email and share more of Bruck Marketing's content. So again, the first thing I'm going to do is these are links to white papers. So again, I'm sharing valuable content with them. And then assuming they've opted in at that point, now I'm going to say, okay, great. Now every month when I send them send out my newsletter, if you will, they're going to be a part of it. So I've created this ecosystem where I start off by just connecting, sharing some valuable content. Now I've moved them over into my my prospect list, and now I'm sharing monthly relevant communications gradually. So so that's the gist of that process. We definitely want to open up to questions. I don't see any in the chat. Let me just leave you with this, and then we'll see if there's any other questions. In terms of takeaways, again, you're going to have the workbook. So always remember that you want to position your offering or solution to a problem to your target market is facing. You want to characterize your ideal client, and you want to establish empathy for their problem. And then you want to structure your marketing story, customer empathy, then a plan, and then action resolution. Then you're ready to start that pipeline process and building up the leads, but think of it as this ecosystem where you're constantly putting information out in front of them. The thing that I've seen through the years that most people want to just race past is making sure that their messaging is right and that their ideal client, they think of this big bucket of target markets, right? Who is really that ideal client? And let's try to get as specific as you can in having a conversation with them. And it could be that you have 5 buckets of conversations, because the conversation is slightly different with each sort of persona that you want to work with. And the more specific your conversation can be, the more effective that conversation will be. So with that, why don't we see if there's any questions? It's not that big of a group, so if anybody just wants to come off mute.
Don't be afraid to ask a question that's, you know, a little bit off the path of what we've been talking about. We're not afraid to go off the cuff.
Go ahead and unmute all the attendees here. Unmute yourself. You'll have to unmute yourself. I actually had sort of a question. We talked a lot about LinkedIn marketing, and you know, I'm familiar with Facebook marketing, but I've been a little bit hesitant to go into LinkedIn advertising, just because I've seen and heard from people that it requires a larger budget. What is your sort of take on that mind frame?
Yeah, well, so there's 2 different things. There's LinkedIn marketing where you're putting ads, and you can even put, like, I could take that same white paper I was talking about, and I could put a little promotion up, and I could push it out there, and I can identify a target market in LinkedIn, and then I put it behind a form, and I get those leads. And that you have to have a pretty substantial budget for that. We've done a little bit of that, and we haven't gotten a lot of leads that way, if I'm just being honest. You know, Facebook is great if you're B2C. A lot of businesses have very effective Facebook communications, right? You have to be monitoring the comments and really engaging people. But if you are, that can be very effective. The LinkedIn lead generation process is a little bit different in that it literally is me emailing through LinkedIn, asking someone to connect, and then starting a conversation. So while you still start with identifying a market that you're going to reach, you then are, and you're automating the process. It still is a communication versus you counting on someone seeing it in their feed and clicking on it.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Yeah. Anyone else?
Come on, we're a small group. I hope not everybody's so silent. This is an opportunity to take advantage of brilliance and guidance at a time we need it. So
let me ask you all a question. I was wondering, as we were going through this, how many of you are selling business to business versus business to consumer? Looks like Peter is a business to business, correct? B2B, B2B, B2B. Anyone B2C? Raise your hand if you're a B2C. Nobody with their video on is a B2C. Okay. All right. So yeah, so this, especially this LinkedIn program that Laura was showing you is particularly effective for B2B audiences, in part because you can be so targeted in terms of the role at a business and the type of industry that you're reaching out to.
Yeah, it's a great way to test as well. So I shared with you, that's my actual campaign. So we run the same thing for ourselves that we help clients with. And I get metrics daily, right? I know exactly what percentage of people are connecting with me and replying to me. And so if I'm not, if you know, when COVID hit, we had to change our messaging, right? Because we suddenly weren't relevant, right? And so it allowed us, like, that day, there was no ramp up. It was this instant, I'm going to change my messaging. And really we just went into, you know, do you want to sit down and just get some advice and help, right? Like, that seemed to be what everybody sort of did when COVID first hit. It was like, well, how can we help each other? So you know, in a lot of cases, I find through that, it's also serving a purpose of expanding my network. So there's a lot of advantages of really leveraging this tool that almost everybody is on LinkedIn, but how much are you leveraging the power up that it brings?
Right.
So.
And I guess just on the practical side of it, you can start using the LinkedIn Sales Navigator tool to target your ideal customer. You can do that on your own today. I think it costs about what $69 to a month to use the Sales Navigator tool, and start building connections that way. Where there's a limitation there is the amount of time that you're going to put in versus having some of this automated, right? And that's where we can help in some of the steps Laura was showing you about, is taking that to a place where you can move at scale and reach out to a greater number of people per day, and continue the conversations without kind of starting from scratch on each communication. For the most part, you should be using talking points, right? You should be coming back and copying and pasting some of the same sentences every time you reach out to a prospect. So just having that stuff at your fingertips, so you can push a button to repeat those same sentences over and over again, is very handy.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I'm not familiar with the LinkedIn for businesses yet. I do have a professional LinkedIn page.
Mm-hmm.
So would you target the customers as a professional or as a business?
Yeah, great question. As a professional. So
Okay.
you would be starting as you.
As Yvonne. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, as Yvonne, and you would be building out your connections. And even like you might post, if you have a regular blog, you might be posting that content as your business, and then you should always be sharing it too as yourself. Because the other advantage is, as you're building up your connections, that's more people that will see those posts as you're, it really is creating like the self-contained marketing system for you. So it's important to have your business page and have the right information on your business page,
Okay.
and on your profile, right? Like the messaging on your profile as you start to do more in LinkedIn is really important. Like, change your background image. Don't use the standard LinkedIn background. Make sure you have an about, right? If you take the workbook that we're going to send out and you write like a really solid message solving a problem for your clients, take that and put it in your about, so that when people look at your profile, they understand that you're there to help them, and that will help people want to be connected with you, so that they see the information that you have to share.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
A quick question, just logistics. What the workbook you reference, is it something to mail out versus digital?
We can send it digitally. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to know how we get it out to our team, to the attendees. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, we intentionally left it not too heavy with graphics, so it's it's easy for somebody to print out and not use up all their ink. But it is handy to have the actual digital copy, because there are some links in there that you can click through and get to some pages.
Joanne has that, so it should be sent out pretty quickly after following this.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Hey, Peter.
There are 5 elements to your story structure, your story template.
Yeah.
You can't tell them all the time on every page on your website or in your communications. How do you decide what works best on, let's say, a home page versus some other page? What part of the story? Is it the empathy part? Is it the authority? What would look best on, let's say, the landing page to validate that person's impulse to come visit you?
Sure. So actually, that structure in its complete whole is really set up for your homepage. And again, coming back to a little bit of the why on that is the way that people read. We know from UX research the way that people read web pages. And if you can get them to stick around for 30 seconds or more, they're likely to stick around then for 2 minutes. If they don't find what they're looking for in the first 10 seconds, they're likely to drop. They spend about 57% of their time on the first screen full of information before they do any scrolling. But if you can inspire them to scroll down, they're likely to continue to scroll down and continue to read your message, right? So these are the things that we're trying to inspire people to do by having a little bit of a longer form message on the homepage. We want to engage them, create that story gap, and make them want to read to the end.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Thank
So
you.
that's great there. And then, for instance, if I'm then going to reach out to somebody by email or through this LinkedIn program, then I might choose some portion of the story to tell, and I may phrase it a little bit differently, right? I still think the most important to answer your question, the most important thing to talk about is the customer empathy, is the problem that they face, and indicate that you have a solution to it, right? Way more interesting for me to come to you and say, hey, you have a problem and I have a solution to it, than to say I have a solution, right? And you're just left with a disconnect between what that solution is and how it applies to you.
Gotcha.
So if you can create curiosity by saying, I understand your problem, I really feel your pain, and we have a solution to it, and we should talk about it, it makes me want to continue the conversation, right, as the audience to that.
Okay, thank you.
So one thing that we can do is we do have an example brand book that we've created that I can send to Joanne, that she can send with the workbook. So it'll basically show you how we've taken the story and then applied it to a homepage.
Right.
It's not that the whole story goes right up front, it's that it tells the story through progressing through the page. So we can share that as well. That might help.
That'd be great. That's very generous. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. The statistic that that I shared, that 57% of the user's time they spend on the first screenful of information. What's kind of interesting about that is that's a measurement by the Nielsen Norming Group. They're the experts in user experience research. 10 years ago, they did the same research, and the answer was that 82% of a reader's time was spent on the first screenful of information. And what we can learn from that is that the best practices that we've added in how a website is designed over the last 10 years has improved the degree to which we inspire people to read down the page, right? And part of the way that we've done that is by spacing out the text more, by including more imagery. And so when you see this long form message, it doesn't look like a long block of text.
Right.
It looks like a progression of elements down the page that keeps you working down. The other thing I'll share about the brand book and just what that is, because I'm not sure how well we've really set up what a brand book is. I mentioned at the beginning that we typically do a 2.5-hour session with clients as they get started with us. And that's part a discovery session to get to understand their business, but we're getting to understand their business so that we can write messaging for them, right? And so the brand book does a few things. It takes all of the notes that we made from the 2.5-hour session, which is very, very planned. It's tightly planned, and we ask specific questions, and we give them those notes back. And we do that to A, confirm that we heard what they said, B, because it helps us internalize their business to rewrite those notes, and 3, so that if they have another vendor that they want to work with, they now have all this information about their business that they can hand off. So that's part of the brand book. The messaging itself, which very often we'll write a message to fit into several different story templates so that we can compare and contrast and see what works best. And that stuff is included in the brand book. And then also if they need design work done, right? So we'll if they want a logo, we'll design a logo, include that in there, include multiple options. We'll review the fonts on their webpage and make sure that that's communicating the right kind of vibe for the business that they are. We'll review their color schemes and show them what they are using and maybe some tweaks that we would recommend. All that becomes part of this single document that they can then refer back to or hand off to another vendor that may end up building out their website. We can build out the website, but we can hand it off to another vendor as well. So it's sort of this kind of universal guide for their brand.
Right. Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Anyone else? Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Angie, you're on mute.
Oh, I can tell.
Every time that happens, BBB team members are going, yeah! They're always excited when I'm on mute. So, Laura, Brian, thank you. This was absolutely delightful. I learned so much. To everybody on the call, we will get the resources that Laura and Brian so generously are offering to us. Most importantly, thank everybody for giving 1 hour of your day to make us better. And Laura, you said it so well. It is the business community has got to support each other. Right now, that's what it's about. We want to see everyone reopen and reopen with gusto and to stay here. So for being part of our community, I give you so many thanks. And to everyone giving your morning time, thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you, everybody.
Thanks, folks.
Have a great one.
You too.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.